Welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Self-Publishing. I am your host, Alyssa, and today I have one of our cherished authors, Karen Harmon, here to chat with us. Karen, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Now, you have published a number of books with Tellwell, and we will get into that. However, I would love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself to get started.
Okay, well, my first book was published when I was 58 years old in 2018. So, of course, now you can do the math and you know how old I am. I work with people on the spectrum. I teach fitness. I'm a mother and a wife, and I have 3 adult children and an annoying little chihuahua.
I'm sure your annoying little chihuahua is a great companion for some of those writing adventures that you are going on, however.
He is.
So you, as mentioned, have published a number of books with us. You have published 5 in total as of right now. That is 3 memoirs and 2 works of fiction. So one of the things that if you watch any interviews that you've been on, or you even look at your website, the term flying by the seat of your pants tends to come up quite a bit.
Yes.
Can you chat a little bit about what that initial self-publishing experience looked like with Looking for Normal back in 2018?
Yes, I can. I've always loved reading and I've always loved memoirs. And it seems that the more family dysfunction and problems that people have, the more I seem to like their books. Needless to say, I've had my fair share of struggles, as we all have. And I also love telling stories. I love entertaining. I love making people laugh, making them think. And many years ago, I used to tell my son real life stories about my father, which would be his grandfather, who he had never met. Just adventurous stories of him riding the rails in the Depression era and coming from Saskatchewan to BC when he was 13 years old by himself. And it was at that time that my son said, "Why don't you write a book about all these stories?" And I didn't even think twice about it. I said, "You know what? I'm going to." However, I chose not to tell anyone I was doing it. So flying by the seat of my pants is that I just started writing. And the more I wrote, the more the memories came back to me, the clearer the picture was. And I really started to draw closer to my father, who is no longer with us. So it was an amazing experience. And the other part of flying by the seat of my pants is that I didn't tell anyone I was writing it. My best friend, my husband, anybody. I just started writing and I didn't have a clue how to publish. And I knew I wanted to self-publish and I knew I wanted help. I couldn't do it by myself in that regard, self-publishing. So as the algorithms go, an ad came up for Tellwell Publishing and I clicked on and it had a questionnaire and I just started filling it out, and the next thing I know I was on the telephone with Scott and I was figuring out what package I wanted, not telling anyone I was doing it.
That is an incredible story because Scott was actually the second publishing consultant that was hired at Tellwell, and he's still with us today, which is incredible. So we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary, and Mr. Scott Lunn, shout out to him. He is, one of our 2 longest running publishing consultants.
Well, it was all 5 of my books.
That is just incredible. It's so amazing to have kind of that consistent and ongoing support through so many different journeys.
By now, he totally knows my story. I feel like he's my friend.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of a really unique thing about the self-publishing model when you choose to work, I think, with a guided self-publishing company is you do get that investment and that attention.
Totally.
I know, we have many people, both, our book marketing consultants and publishing consultants who share like the wins and the things that their authors are up to. In our previous episode with Mitch, where we were debunking self-publishing myths, he actually talked about how he has authors that text him Merry Christmas and ask him how his
Yeah.
family are doing. And
That's so nice.
it really does become
Yeah.
part of our journey just as much as it is the author's journey. So that's just
Yeah.
incredible to hear. Thank you for
Good.
sharing that.
Yeah.
So you said that you knew that you wanted to self-publish. What did that decision-making process look like? And was there ever a consideration of, yikes, this is, really personal information and memories that I have shared. And now I'm going to be publishing it for the world and family and friends to see. And how did you kind of navigate those feelings?
So, my first book was actually written about my parents, and they are no longer alive. And a lot of the family members associated to them, not my siblings, but associated to them, have passed on also. So, I really didn't have a lot of fear when it came to divulging secrets. My mother was bipolar. She had some mental health issues, but it wasn't talked about. It wasn't even a thing. In fact, back in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't even a term. It's really interesting for me to research the history of mental health. So I really got a lot of joy out of that. And the publishing experience was so amazing for that first book. But I'm leading up to something, because it was my second book that I started to feel a little bit vulnerable. Because the second book, Where Is My Happy Ending? A Journey of No Regrets, is primarily about me. Starts when I'm 17 years old, and just basically how I navigate moving away from home, the disco scene of downtown Vancouver, and the unsavory characters that came along the way. And so it was my editor actually that helped me, because I have adult children, as I mentioned, and I was afraid. I was a little bit afraid. How much do you want your children to know about your past? How much do you want my fitness participants to know about me, right? And friends and family. And so I reached out to my editor, and she said, Karen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write down anything and everything, send it to me, and I'm going to help you navigate. I'm going to help you, because as you can probably tell already from my personality, I'm not a big person for swearing, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I also want to be truthful. I wanted to inspire other people from my story, so I wanted it to resonate. I wanted my story to resonate with my readers.
Yeah.
So it was my editor that helped me the most, and yeah, as I have no regrets.
Were there any conversations prior to the book coming out that you felt needed to happen? Or did you kind of allow for your adult children or friends or people close to you to explore that material kind of on their own time and on their own term?
Yes, I think the latter. For me, what I found, as in life in general, when you start telling too many people your story, then you're going to get a lot of opinions and you're going to get a lot of feedback. Now, unless that's something that you want, sure, shout it from the rooftops and tell everyone. But I
Right.
was given some really good advice one time when I was a single mom in my 30s, and a woman who was basically mentoring me, she said, Karen, try to pick two people that you really trust, two people that you know love you unconditionally, and share all those nitty gritty hard bits with them, and that will be a little bit more manageable. So I did that. So the first book I didn't tell anyone, as I said, and it was interesting to get the feedback, because I do have three siblings, and my sister was amazing. Like, she supports me 100%. It's almost like I can do no wrong. However, she said, oh, I remember it differently than that. Oh, I wished you would have consulted with me, because I could have added this. My two older brothers, one of them said, I love your writing, but it just makes me really sad. My other brother said, I'm not too sure if I can read your books. It's not that I don't like them and I don't think you're a good reader, but I really don't know if I want to remember, or I have different memories of mom.
Right.
So I accepted that. I accepted their thoughts, their opinions, and I just kind of moved on. So when I was doing my second book about myself, I came to the conclusion that this is my story, and these are my memories, and these are the things that happened to me. So if people read it a different way than I intended, they can ask me questions. We can talk about it, but I'm not worried or offended. I will admit, when it first came out, I did feel vulnerable. I did go, ooh, chapter 3. I write about some things in there that they're a little bit sticky. And I had a friend say to me, one of those close mentor type friends, she said, yes, you probably do feel vulnerable. But in my mind, vulnerability is also another word for strength. And it
Right.
takes strength to be vulnerable. And I just loved hearing that because we want to be strong, right? I felt great.
Absolutely.
I felt great about that.
Well, I can only imagine how cathartic the experience is in taking those things that have for so long been close to your chest and maybe only, for you in terms of having that knowledge, and then taking that and putting pen to paper and
Yes,
having kind of that therapeutic healing journey through developing such deeply personal works. And
yes,
similarly to, as you mentioned, having it being part of your healing journey, receiving that information as a sibling of yours, whether it's, as you mentioned, reading this as your brother makes me sad, or
yeah,
another sibling thinking that their interpretation of your mom was different than how you
yes,
experienced it. And I think
yes,
it's okay to recognize that their experiences are their own and they're different, and
yes,
the way that you experienced life is being
yes,
poured out into these pages for those who need it and can
yes,
resonate with it and receive it in the way that you intended it to be
yes.
received. So that's a
Can I,
powerful thing.
can I just add something to that? So
Yeah.
this one brother in particular who doesn't remember our mother that way, he also came to terms with the fact that I'm the youngest in the family and he's 6 years older than me. So he had moved out when I was going through, when my mother's health had intensified. So he was not there. And he came
Mm,
to that conclusion. And he said, I didn't realize that it got that way.
right.
And so we actually got closer because of my story.
That's incredible. And
Yeah.
I'm really interested in chatting a little bit about how your journey from crafting these memoirs turned into teaching memoir writing.
Yeah.
Can you chat a
Yeah.
little bit about that? Because that to me is just an incredible pivot.
Yes, that was really exciting. So, when my second book came out, it was during that time of COVID and everything was shut down. And I had planned to do a talk at our local library in North Vancouver. And of course, everything was shut down. And so the librarian suggested I do a Zoom book talk. And I was actually kind of disappointed when she said that. I like face to face, real people. And this was before we even figured out Zoom, right? But I didn't want to say no. So it was just a fine oiled machine the way the library had it all set up. So I had 32 people, I believe, on this Zoom call. And I basically gave a little bit of a story. I read from my book and it went really, really well. And then I opened it up for questions. And then I got a phone call from the librarian, and she says, just so you know, I was listening in on your talk, and we enjoyed it so much here at the library. I, in particular, her speaking, would like you to write a memoir writing course. Present it to us, and we'll critique it and we'll edit it and talk to you about it. Would you be interested in that? And I said, yes, absolutely. I had so much fun creating this course, and it really helped me that these people asked questions because I relayed the course on their questions, but also on the whole street smarts kind of way to do it.
Right.
Because I think one of the questions is people often ask me what my background is, my education. And one of the things is flying by the seat of my pants. I was very shy in high school. I was an average student. And when I was in grade 12 and everybody was looking into colleges and universities, the guidance counselor invited my mother in and said, yes, I don't think Karen is suited for a higher education. She'd be better off as a shop girl or getting a job, doing something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that,
Right.
but back in those days, you just listened and you took her word for what it was. And I thought, oh, guess I'm not very clever. But I knew I could talk to people and I
Mm.
knew I could relate to people and I enjoyed people. So when this librarian said, could you teach a memoir writing course? My self-esteem just shot right up.
As it
I had a
should.
different self-esteem because I could teach fitness and I worked with children and that was great. But when she suggested I teach a course, I was like, oh my gosh. And I had already gone to college as a single mom. So I did have some experience there as well. And so it all just kind of came together. And now that's what I love to do on the side.
That is just incredible. And I think that it's interesting that you mention kind of that question being posed as what is your education as someone who has written two memoirs and then is teaching these memoir writing classes? Because one of the
Yes.
things we hear very often from writers has to do with that barrier of, well, can I articulate my thoughts well enough? Am
Mm.
I grammatically correct in the way that I'm putting this manuscript together? And I think that it's so important to consider the fact that everybody has a story to tell and it doesn't need to be perfect and it doesn't need to be perfectly punctuated and flow flawlessly. That's what your team is for. That's what your editors
Yes.
are for. And
Yes.
can you chat a little bit about what your experience with helping people overcome some of those internal maybe blocks and barriers looks like?
Yes, I think for people that are been toying with the idea of writing a book, especially a memoir, but they have these fears and there's these blocks and they think, well, maybe I'm not smart enough or I've got all these highly educated friends. What are they going to think of me? Or what about the repetitive words or not being as descriptive as I should be? And one of the things that I teach in my memoir writing class is that I get people to start. You've got to get started somewhere. So start with one memory and just sit down and write 3 paragraphs about it. Don't worry about the description. Just sit there and recall that memory. It could be a happy memory. It could be going to the ice cream parlor with your grandfather. It could be just about anything. You've got these memories. You've only written 3 paragraphs about it. That's enough for now. Let's start there. Put it aside. Take a break. Pull it back out again and read through it and really start to think deeper. Think about, okay, this happened in 1972. You're aware of the age that you were. So think about 1972. What might you be wearing? You might not remember exactly, but you could remember what the fashion was back then. Or maybe you didn't have fashion. Maybe you wore overalls and gumboots. Whatever you think you might be wearing, think about that and draw that in, write that in. Think about the music that was popular back then. Think about what time of year might it have been. If it was the ice cream parlor, might have been the summer. So what you're going to do now with those 3 paragraphs is you're going to go back and you're going to write some descriptive words and sentences to draw the reader in so we can visualize more of what you're trying to tell us. And it makes the story so much more interesting and intriguing. You can do that. And that's just a little street smarts kind of a tip, right? Of
Absolutely.
what you read when you read a book.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said about hearing this from somebody who has been there and done it, but who also, like you mentioned, doesn't have necessarily the background that somebody might expect from whoever is hosting this memoir writing course or who has
Yes,
produced these memoirs. Like
yes,
receiving that information as someone who's maybe
yeah,
intimidated at the thought or the process is,
yes,
I think, really validating and encouraging
yes,
to somebody to say, maybe this
yes,
is something that I can explore and something that I can do
yes,
myself.
yes,
Now, can we chat a little bit about your second book, Where is My
mhm,
Happy Ending? A Journey of
yeah.
No Regrets?
Yeah.
You have talked a little bit about, some of the obstacles surrounding this book as well as the ones within the book, and how you were also inspired and influenced by the Me Too movement. So, how did that cultural moment shape that decision to share the personal experience? And how did you
Yes.
see it as a way to connect with others?
So after I wrote my first book, that was it. I was not going to, I had never thought I would one day have 5 books under my belt, and I do have a sixth one that I'm working on.
Ooh, details to come.
However, I thought when the Me Too movement came out and it was in the news and all these women were coming forward and it was just sort of shocking. And as a woman, I knew, I was a bit of a woman's liber back in the day. I like to think I was. But I really started to think about what some of these allegations were. And I thought, I've had some situations in my life, and I can name every one of my friends, every one of my close friends that had confided in me have had situations as well, whether it's just a derogatory remark, a pat on the bottom, or something much worse. And I thought, maybe I should write a little bit about these things, and I want other women to know that they're not alone. I want other women to say, hey, that happened to me, and that was really difficult. But look at what's happened to Karen now. She's written about it, she's worked through it, and now she's moving on. And there, I won't lie, I cried, I felt very sad, I was nostalgic, I missed, I had the woulda, coulda, shouldas, but writing about them helped me get through them all. Honestly, someone could pick out something in that book of mine and say, oh my gosh, how did you deal with that? But now that I'm through it, it's a part of me. It's made me who I am. And
Right.
like I said, no regrets.
That is just amazing to hear. And I think it again goes to show the power of taking something so deeply personal and challenging and pen to paper, and whether you're doing it for yourself or you're doing it for, those who might resonate with it,
Yeah.
those are all good enough reasons to take the time to do it.
Yeah.
And for the people
Yes.
who attend your memoir writing classes, do you find that there is that specific kind of theme or a topic particularly that draws them to your classes and makes them want to share?
The biggest thing that people share with me, the biggest fear that people have is, what are my siblings going to think? And what are my children going to think? Those are the two biggest fears that I hear and concerns from people. And I know we've already touched on that and we've talked about it, but it does lead up to my older sister. So I have a sister that's 13 years older than me. So when I was 4, she was, how old? She was 17. She was ready. She was ready to leave the nest. And my parents had this little baby. So we had completely separate childhoods. She was the firstborn. My parents struggled financially. They were flying by the seat of their pants. It was 1950s, and what could they do? 1947 was when she was born. So when I'd written my second book and my sister read it, she said, I did not know you when you were going through all of this, and I wished I'd had, but thank you so much for writing it, and I feel so much closer to you now. And then she said, why don't you write a book about me? And my first thoughts were, and I'm not telling any tales out of school because she laughs when I say this, I felt, what is she talking about? It's hard enough to write a book about myself. How on earth am I going to write a book about a sister that I was slightly estranged from in the sense of the age difference? And then, as I said, COVID happened and I started phoning my sister. At the very beginning of that, none of us really knew what was going on. And so I was starting to feel a little guilty because I wasn't very close with my sister. And we all want to have a sister. And so I started to phone my sister, who lives in Kamloops, about a 4-hour drive from where I live. And it was during those phone conversations that I got to know my sister. And she started to tell me stories of my mom and dad before I knew them. And then I learned that she was the apple of their eye. It wasn't just me, the youngest child. My sister was the first apple of their eye. And so I got to know my parents a little bit in these phone conversations. And then she started to tell me really funny stories. And then she started to tell me very sad stories. My sister was bullied very badly throughout her childhood. She was a larger person and she used to call herself the F word, which is fat. It's not a very liked word now, but she called herself that because the bullies called her that.
Mm,
Summing up, I just knew I had to tell her story. I knew it would be entertaining. I knew it would be historical. 1947, Vancouver. I knew that she had a different relationship with our mother. My mother, who had her mood swings, I found her extremely funny. My sister did not. So her and my mother were a little bit like oil and water. And I thought, no, I'm going to tell her story. So what we did was, she'd never been on a computer. She started to write me handwritten letters. And back in those days, people had beautiful handwriting. So she wrote me these
absolutely.
beautiful handwritten letters, 10 pages in length. And it was when we were on the telephone that she would tell me things. I'd say, oh, write that down, write that down. That would be really good for the book. So we spent about a year writing this book together. It's called Fat and Beautiful, Story of No Regrets. Long story short, that brought us closer together. It really did. And so I do little book talks now in Kamloops, and she's always there at my side. So it's really nice.
That is so sweet. That's amazing that you were able to connect through her story and through your love of writing. And I imagine there are unique challenges to telling somebody else's story versus telling your
Yes,
own. What does
yes.
that look like from the perspective of,
Um,
putting
the,
pen to paper and articulating that?
yes. Well, one of the challenges is I wanted to be authentic to her. I wanted everything to be accepted and approved by her. So I was a little bit nervous about that. And then sometimes she would have a memory and I couldn't find a way to tell it without it being boring. So she said to me once, she said, oh, yeah, 1962. That year, Uncle Hank spilled a cup of coffee on Mum. And that was it. That was her memory. And I'm like, how do I weave that into an interesting story? So some of the stuff she remembered, I skipped. And then other times I thought, okay, 1962, what was the weather like? What were people doing? How did my mother feel, our mother feel when that happened? But the other thing that ended up happening, because we've already talked about being the author of the memoir, but what about a person that's reliving their memory to the writer? So I would get text messages from her, and she would say, after I wrote that memory, I cried for 3 days. But on the fourth day, did I ever feel good? I've passed that trauma now. Thank you so much for telling my story.
That is just
So
incredible.
yeah, so she healed at the same time.
Right.
At
I
the same
can
time.
imagine how rewarding it must be from your perspective and I'm
Yeah.
sure challenging as well, but
Yes.
to help people also navigate some of these deep things that they must be carrying.
Yes. Yes. We hold a lot of trauma. And that's the other part is that she would also say, I woke up in the middle of the night and I had a flashback. I had a memory of this or of that. And that spoke to me. And that really helped me with my memoir writing classes as well. Because people say, oh, I can't remember my childhood, or, oh, yeah, I remember bits of it. But the more you write about it, the more those flashbacks are going to occur. But you have to be open to it. You have to let that door open, let it swing wide open. And you'll be amazed at the flashbacks you have
Oh,
and the memories. Some of them will be hilarious, and then some of them will be hard.
definitely. Now, I do want to take a little brief moment to shift because while memoir writing is, of course, where your self-publishing journey began, that is not where it ended. You have now
Right.
written two works of fiction with a third on the
Yes.
way. Can you talk a little
Yes.
bit about where the shift occurred and what the difference has kind of been like for you to make that transition from writing a memoir to writing a fiction story?
Yes, I can because after the first book, I guess I had the writing bug. So, first book about my parents and then how I fit into that. Second book about myself. Third book about my sister. And again, how I fit in and our parents in there as well. I still wanted to write more, but I thought I cannot talk about myself anymore. I'm done. I am done reliving the past. So I was sharing this with my son, who's in his 20s, and I said, "But what do I do? I love writing so much, and I also write blogs. They're on my website, but I wanted to write more." And it was him. He said, "Mom, why don't you write a fiction?" I'm like, "Oh, that sounds so scary. I don't know." Like with a nonfiction, I have those memories in those are true facts and they are easy to drum up and they're also easy to weave around and make them descriptive. But a fiction, that's bare bones. Like I have to do a lot of creating. And then he said, "Yeah, but Mom, think of all the shows you like to watch, all those episodic series like This Is Us, and I liked a show called Freaks and Geeks, and I'm a product of the 70s, and I love the fashion." And I thought, hey, wait a minute. Why don't I write a book that's like one of the shows I like to watch, but also a little bit of something I know about? So my very first fiction is called Class of 78. And that's the year I graduated. And it takes place on the eve of 10 high school students' graduation. And then it follows them for the next 10 years of their lives, leading up to their 10-year high school reunion. So within that, it was so much fun. These characters became my friends. I almost felt like a crazy person because I would say, "Oh, I've got to go see Darcy Richmond, what she's up to today." And the way I created my characters was looking back at high school and all the different people that we go to school with. And I was a shy wallflower. I'll be the first to admit that. And there was the beauty queen, there was the cheerleader, and I wasn't them, but I admired them. There was the jock, there was the pothead dude, and I liked all these people. But so what I did was I created characters about them and I had so much fun doing it. And I love talking about the music from the 70s and 80s, the fashion, all of that. It was really, really fun.
And so then when you started your second fiction, what
Yes.
did that transition look like and what is that
So
book about?
So that transition was while I was writing about these 10 high school students, I talked a little bit about their home life, a little bit about their childhood, but I didn't really delve into their parents. So after that book came out, I sort of felt bad for their parents. Like I said, these people have become real to me. I sort of thought, I want to give these parents a voice and I want to also delve into maybe why were they those kind of parents? Why was Susan Gillian's mother so strict and seemingly mean in the book, Class of 78? Well, then we find out in the next book that Susan Gillian's mother came from Poland during the war, and her mother was strict. And she was terribly teased when she came here to Canada. And so it's turned into not a historical fiction per se, but in the sense of I love delving into truth and how people maneuvered the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Drive-in movie theaters, poodle skirts, roller skates. It was really hard times and fun times. So my recent fiction is called Class of 56. So it is about the parents of these high school students. It's really
Now,
fun.
you have also alluded to a third fiction,
Yes,
which has been the third in what is now turning into some sort of a series, it seems like.
yes,
So,
yes.
whereabouts are you in that writing process? And
So that writing process is almost done, but
oh,
Class of 56 just came out at the end of November, so I don't want to rush things, right? I want to
Yes.
let that baby grow up a little bit and meet the world, and then I'll be contacting Scott, and that book will take off. But that was a little bit too with my son. We have lots of conversations, and he said, "Well, you wrote 3 memoirs. Why don't you write 3 fiction?"
Mm.
And I thought, what about the Depression era? What about before this fictitious town of Meadowbrook came to be? Or was it the start of how it came to be? So my next book, it takes place in 1912, Canada. And we go to Barkerville in the late 1800s when the gold rush was there. I have one of my characters get stuck in a brothel in Montreal, and it's all true facts. However, it's fictitious, fictional characters. Yeah.
I have heard little rumblings about indie film or
Yeah.
series.
Yeah.
What and how did that come to be? And can you share anything pertaining to that with us?
I can. I can't say that anything's happening right this minute, but I'm a little bit of a dreamer. I'm a little bit of a think outside the box person, and I just love episodic series. I just love them. So when I'm writing Class of 78, Class of 56, I'm visualizing these as a show. I'm visualizing almost episode after episode or a movie. Wouldn't turn down a movie deal. But so what I'm doing is I have an app called Final Cut. It's a script writing app, and I am going to take some screenwriting courses. My son is actually a film student. Well, he was a film student at Vancouver Film School. So again, he's got lots of ideas for me, and he has lots of connections. So that's my dream. Let's get this next book out and let's start writing a screenplay.
Manifesting it. I love that
I'm going to
so
do it.
much.
I'm going to do it.
Now, you have amassed quite a dedicated, loyal, and engaged following throughout this entire process on social media. How do you keep this group of people engaged and wanting more and anticipating some of these upcoming projects?
Well, first of all, it does help if you like or learn to like marketing. I do. I just love it. And not in the sense that, oh, I'm bragging, I've written these books, but in the sense of how can I display my work in a different way to make it fun, to make it unique, to pull people in? So I do love creating Instagram posts and making them fun and flirty and whatnot. And I also like to share a little bit more of myself. So it's not just about books.
Mm.
I like to share bits about being a grandma or a little bit about fitness. And I find that really draws people in because it gives you that human aspect.
Absolutely.
And I also open the door. So with Instagram, there's a direct messaging option. We call those DMs.
Yes.
And you can have conversations with people that follow you or comment. And I'm always, in every single post, I encourage people, send me a message. I want to talk to you. I really, really do. And I do. I have lengthy conversations with people, 22 to 80. I've made friends. I have 2 or 3 wonderful female friends that I've met on Facebook and social media. And honestly, I feel like I've been face to face with them having coffee with the wonderful conversations that we have. And we either talk about writing or family or illness. I recently had hip replacement surgery and I'm an open book, no pun intended. And I talk a little bit about that and I show a video of my progress going through my hip replacement surgery. So I don't know, I just have fun with it. I really do.
I think that's great advice. And one of the things that I often tell different people pertaining to social media specifically is that people support people and that engagement is a two-way street. I think it's really easy to get lost in the idea of posting because it's a necessary evil and we have to do it. And then once I posted, my work here is done. But it really
Yeah.
does come back to who you are and the humanness, and that's really what's relatable to people. And then with the engagement, there's really nothing to inspire people to keep that conversation going if you're not acknowledging them in the first place when they do leave a
Right.
comment or they do share your
Yes.
content. And so I love that
Yes.
you add that call to action of, DM me, I want to talk to you. That is
Yes.
such a great way to maintain and build those
Yeah.
relationships.
Can I add something to that? The
Absolutely.
other thing that I like to do is I like to follow other authors. And I really believe that it's important to support each other. But in doing so, why not leave a comment on their post? Why not encourage them?
Yeah.
And that will draw more people to you.
Hmm.
And it will also inspire them. So it really is a win-win when you connect with others on social media.
Especially, I think, if you're connecting with authors who write within the same genre or the same type of material, their audience is probably pretty similar to your own, and their demographic is probably similar to
Yes.
your target demographic. And so,
Yeah.
putting yourself kind of out there on the radar of this new audience is a really great way to get some additional eyes on you and your work that maybe wouldn't have otherwise discovered your projects. Now, when you first self-published, you did
Mhm.
not have a roadmap. So, what advice would you give now that you have published 5 books so far with us? What
Yes.
advice would you give to authors who are new to self-publishing but maybe feel a bit overwhelmed or unsure about the process?
I think the best thing, especially if you're going with Tellwell, is to trust your project manager. They're not going to steer you wrong. I find that my project manager, his name is Sem, he's been a calming force to me because even though, I teach yoga and I kind of seem grounded and calm, when it comes to technology, I'm telling you, my heart goes up this high and I almost can't think straight when I've been asked to upload something or open this and check this. And I've reached out to my project manager so many times. This isn't working. I don't quite know how to do it. Help me. And he always responds with, absolutely. In fact, would you like me to do that for you? Like, yes, please. Thank you. It's been so incredible. So I've had to just kind of cool my jets, calm myself, and know that my project manager has my best interests at heart and wants the best for me. And so that's number one. Number two, I highly recommend an editor with Tellwell or an editor of your own because, again, they're not going to steer you wrong either. And how you read something might not be, or how you write something might not be how you intended it to be read. Things can get misconstrued and mixed up, but to have somebody that's trained in editing with grammar and sentence structure and repetitive words, why not let them help you, right? We're not
Absolutely.
alone.
No, absolutely. And one of the things that I think it's important to remember is that it's okay to not be an expert in everything. It's okay if your contribution to your book is the manuscript and that's it, right? Like it is okay if you do require an editor or someone to design your book cover, somebody to
Yes,
distribute it. These are all
yes,
things that are honed skill sets, and not everybody is going to feel confident in each of those
yes.
areas.
I absolutely love every single one of my book covers that the design team at Tellwell worked with me on. I didn't design them myself. They didn't design them themselves. You know what I mean? And I love the questionnaires. That's the other thing. You get questionnaires all the time. Who doesn't love a questionnaire? You get to talk about yourself, right? Or you get to talk about your dream and your plan.
Right. The things you
And
love.
so
Yeah.
that's what I loved. And I went on Pinterest and I got ideas, and I just had such a good time with the design team creating the covers of my books. So, as you said, there's a team. And as I tell my daughter, who has a new little boy, little baby, and I know this is redundant, we've heard this a million times, but it takes a village. It
Mm.
really takes a village raising a child and writing a book.
Absolutely. I think that that is just a great kind of point to transition here. We have a user submitted question from our segment called The Plot Thickens. If you
Okay.
aren't yet following us, please be sure to check us out on Instagram at Tellwell Publishing. I post every single week with questions tailored to the guests that we will be having on the podcast and asking for you to submit your own. So this question comes from Emily, and the question is, how long does it take to write a book? And do you schedule time in, or is it spontaneous?
I want to say all of the above, but I will dissect that a little bit. So, my first book actually took me 7 years because I kept putting it aside. I would write about my father and laugh and miss him and cry. And then I thought, oh, I better write about my mother. No, I can't do that today. So it took me a long time to write the first book. The second book, I actually wrote it in almost 2 years because I loved the writing process. I loved it so much. And I would always be fresh and awake first thing in the morning. And I'm an early riser, so sometimes I'd write for 2 or 3 hours in the morning. And then what would happen is if I was swimming or walking or even at work, I would have those flashbacks that I talked about. And I would use my little note thing on my phone. Is that what
Yep.
it's called? Where you
Yep, your
keep your
note
note.
app. Yep.
Yeah. And I would write things, and you can talk into that too, which is
Hmm.
fantastic. So sometimes my writing was spontaneous, but not to do it directly on my computer. I would scratch it out on an envelope, or I would write this, or I would hear something on the radio and I'd pull over on the side of the road and say, oh, I have to add this song. This song, it really was big when I did this. So I hope that's answering Emily's question. Do you think? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that that's a great answer. So now we are going to head into a fun portion here of our episode, which is rapid fire questions. Now, are you an e-reader or a hard copy kind of person when it comes to your books?
I have to say hard copy. I just love turning a page. I love holding a book. I love taking that book with me. Lots of my friends are e-readers though,
Mm,
because it's easier to see the lighting. You can read them in your bed. Like sometimes in your bed when you've got a book, you're on your side or you're doing different things and it can be tricky. Answer to your question, hardcover for sure.
amazing. And what is one thing in your workspace that you can't be without?
I did say I like to write in the morning, so
Mhm.
I do like to have a cup of coffee. Now, if I write for 2 or 3 hours, I'm not constantly drinking coffee. So I start with a coffee, then I have water. And I did mention a Chihuahua at the beginning of this interview, and his name is Steven. And
Steven.
he sits right beside me while I'm writing. So it's very comforting. And I don't know if I told you this yet, but I like to write in bed.
I think that that is such a fun and great way to kind of make your space where you feel very comfortable
Yes.
also a very productive
Yes.
environment. And so
Yes.
I love that you work from bed. I think that that is just amazing. I might
I
have to
call it
start
my
adopting
office.
that.
I say to my husband, I'm going to my office.
Now, what is your favorite social media platform? If I had to guess, I'm going to say that it's Instagram.
Yes, it is. I'm on Facebook, I'm on TikTok, but Instagram's my favorite. I just love it. It's just, to me, it's simple to maneuver.
Yep. Yep.
And, uh, and I have 7,700 followers, so it
Incredible.
gives me a lot to work with.
Absolutely, it would. And last but not least, what is your favorite book right now?
Okay, it's a three-part answer. I tend
Okay.
to do that. I tend to do that. I have to tell you, my very favorite book is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, and I've read it 3 or 4 times. I'm currently reading 2 books. One may sound a little bit silly. I'm reading my own book. So, what happens to me when I first publish one of my books and people start reading them and I start to get feedback? and they'll say, I love that character, Cassandra. She just reminded me so much of myself. Or I love the way you structured that sentence in chapter 8. So what I have to do, I have to go to my book and I have to read what they're reading. I want to know. I want to read it again and then think of what they're thinking. I love doing that. It's so much fun.
I feel like you need to start maybe annotating based on what people are telling you. So going in and just writing in the margins of your own book, like a thought that was received from
That's a
this
really good
person
idea.
could be something helpful in the future of your writing
Yes.
process.
That's a great idea. I'm going to start doing that. But the other part to that answer is because I'm starting to follow a lot of Tell-Well authors, I like to purchase their books. And in supporting other indie authors and going on their pages and following them and liking what they do, commenting, why not purchase a book? What's 15, 20, $25 three or four times a year,
Right?
right? So I do have a book that I'm reading. It's called The Anniversary by Sarah Sterling, and she's a Tell-Well author. It's fabulous. It's a really good book. I'm really enjoying it.
Amazing. I'm so happy to hear that you're enjoying some other indie author works, and I'm sure they would love to hear that as well. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here, Karen. We really appreciate it and have loved having this conversation. And if you are new to our podcast, Demystifying Self-Publishing, please be sure to subscribe, give it a like and a follow. You can also catch the video episodes on YouTube and continue to listen wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.